I think the main point is that I think the wish list that Nori made is quite good, because I mean that are things that I always in my work jump upon. I think Isabel and I share a history where we tried to make the EU 27 multi-regional input-output table, and it just went wrong because countries did not publish the valuation layers. We could estimate them quite well, but still some countries were not really pleased if we would publish these kind of estimates. So I think I cannot do that, I'm just a simple scientist, but particularly all the people here, I think we work all for important organizations. Hopefully these people have the convincing power, let's put it that way, to at least get released a number of these basic statistics that you really need to build multi-regional input-output tables. And that is indeed valuation layers, supply and use tables in a kind of common classification. And then you somehow have to reconcile your trade. That is a big issue. Not only you have to reconcile trade, I think Nadine made it very clear that you also need to understand which kind of sectors are importing certain kind of issues from different countries. At this moment, in my projects, you use simple things like proportionality assumptions. Every sector in every country that uses a product has the same share of imports and exports. Well, it's all, very simplistic. So that are a few things, and I would say for the short term concentrate on these things. I see a lot of movement now to make things more complicated by distributing sectors over what is okay, foreign owned or not, and all those kind of things. I would be happy if we would have, for let's say 80 countries that publish supply and use tables, just have the basics right. Yeah. Before we go to more sophisticated things. And then maybe I and my teams in the meantime can do all kind of fancy tricks that statisticians don't like, that we try to detail it for the environmental purposes, do it a bit outside the statistical community because that is always difficult. And I think that may be a way forward. Shall I keep it at this? Because otherwise it'll take too much time.
No, that's very good.
Okay.
But yeah, those are very good points.
Yes, so I will go on with the European Union's perspective. So we are quite somehow lucky because we have some legal framework in the European Union. So then somehow it allows us to have some really harmonized data through 28 countries at least. And currently, so SNA 2008 has been adopted already from some countries present here, and in EU we will move to the European version of the SNA 2008, and data will be delivered now. So we thought that using the opportunity of this new methodology framework, that we will launch a project to a European multi-country supply use input-output tables. And here I say supply use first because the main focus will be supply use and then input-output. And in this framework, so the wish list of Nori may be quite happy in the sense that every year, so we will get some data, and then every 5 years we will get all of these tables at basic prices and split imports and so on use tables. So at least you see that you will have really every 5 years really a good frame and a good database at EU level, and we will be collaborating with OECD and UN to try to, let's say, have some blocks, so EU blocks and then OECD countries and then UN block at the end. And when we did this first consolidated European tables, the main issue was reconciliating import and export already intra-EU. And in this sense, reconciliation of trade asymmetries is quite crucial. And in parallel of this project to have European multi-country supply use tables, we will have as well some supporting financing supports to EU countries that they look into these asymmetries, not only looking at, let's say, what are the figures, because we know where are the big gaps between two partners, but really to try to solve it. So here, let's say, the discussion and presentation that we had on some methods how to reconcile figures, I think for us it would be a support as well to those countries that they could at least investigate and try to solve and apply some methodology. So in this sense of, let's say, a work program, I may say that from a European perspective, we are not yet there to provide guidelines how you should do it, because I think we need still some experimental data from countries, European countries, to see how to solve it and which kind of method to apply. And then we, in parallel with this multi-country framework, we could have something as recommendation or guidelines to at least European countries, and as well maybe to work with OECD and UN to see, let's say, the global picture. And to conclude, I would like to say as well that in this European multi-country supply use project, we will try to incorporate as much as we can and the business side, so this tech and stake data. So let's say the discussion we will have this afternoon on this extended supply use tables. But here as well, I would say that we need first a work program, because obviously we need to prioritize things. At least our EU countries, I guess they cannot do, and they cannot handle everything at the same time. So we need some prioritization there. But still, I think we have to leave it open, sure, to further work. And we have always to keep in mind, let's say, the main user needs. So, okay, for the moment, we see some questions on the global value chain and so on, but you never know in 5 years' time what will be the subject for policymakers. So, again, obviously, it's quite difficult to just answer like this when you have to set up all data sources and so on. So it takes time, every time, and then maybe in 5 years' time we will have to handle another question. So, yeah, we have to progress, but maybe with the limited resources that everybody has as well, so keep still a little bit maybe backwards, not to just to dive into one direction and wait a little bit. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Gary? Good. Oh, yes.
Thanks. So I think it's been a very rich discussion over the last few days. If I think about my main takeaways, I think I would pick 3, and maybe I would classify them as past, present, future in terms of where the work is. The recent work that I have found most, I think, promising has been the emergence of these new statistics on trade and value added being made available to a wide public through online databases. I think that the TIVA statistics are the best illustration of that. The new INEGI data set that's come out, and other countries creating data sets, I think is really important. So one takeaway, we've got much, much better information on trade and value added that can be relevant to policymakers, and a lot of it is being displayed very well for individual countries in terms of how they're participating in value chains. Whether you look at the OECD data, the UNCTAD Global Investment Report, or new things coming out, it's typically been country-specific to the world, and it will get more complicated. In terms of a second takeaway, what's currently, I think, most promising is all the progress being made on service classifications. Everybody said that we've got a lot of, traditionally, we've had a lot of information on trade and goods, but trade and services has really been far behind. I think that gap is being closed very rapidly. I think some of the projects that have been sponsored by Eurostat and others, I mean, I've seen Tim Sturgeon's work just on the IT services and how to break that into a lot of more specific categories. I think that work is great, because the link between goods and services is a big part of understanding how countries are participating in the global economy. So I think a lot of progress is being made there. If I think future, and I think in particular, what questions will policymakers want to drive in terms of how to use things like global value chains and supply use tables? To me, the big issue is how to communicate these new statistics at a regional level. Actually, when I think about projects that are coming into my center, say from the African Development Bank, they want to know how global value chains work in East Africa or Southern Africa. We've got a project on food security in the Middle East and North Africa around wheat. The Inter-American Development Bank is looking at Central America and how Central America, a set of small countries who individually feel very vulnerable in terms of a lot of the globalization changes, might be linking together in some productive arrangements that would be new. I think the the groups that have moved furthest in this area, I mean, EU, for sure, the EU 28's already got very much of a regional vision. They've got data that are linked at a regional level much better than other parts of the world. I think the next region is actually East Asia. China and the surrounding countries with different kinds of collaborations, IDE, JETRO, and other groups, they've been creating a set of statistics that link what's happening in that region in terms of the flows connecting those countries. So it's going beyond having individual country level data. We needed that. That's a building block. They're incorporating the links between goods and services, but what they're saying from a policy point of view is what those countries want to know is how their regional economies are actually tied together presently and where the gaps are in terms of future advances. I think the single biggest opportunity, because it's been lagging, is actually North America. I think if you take Mexico, US, Canada, 3 countries that have already harmonized a lot of their data, and where the trade asymmetries are extremely pronounced when you look at the fact that well over 80% of Mexico's exports go to the US and similar percentages of Canada go to the US, there's a whole lot of very policy relevant issues that come from better understanding how the 3 economies are linked. And I'll just end with one example. Industry Canada, about 4 years ago, asked Tim Sturgeon and I to do a study on the Canadian auto parts sector. And they picked auto parts because it was an important part of the manufacturing economy. And when we did the kind of trade analysis and the normal things of global value chains, but when we talked to the companies in Canada, the parts suppliers, one of the things that they said most concerned them was that, yes, a lot of their trade is directed to the US, but they thought about the US automotive market in terms of supply chains or value chains. They said, we are mostly linked to the American company supply chains. But at least half of the US automotive market are the foreign transplants, the European auto companies and the Asian auto companies for which Canadian firms felt delinked. And so part of their challenge for us in this study is do a value chain study of Canadian auto parts suppliers that are linked to the real global value chains in North America in terms of where are we strong and where are we vulnerable. I think lots of regions are going to have those same questions around the industries that are most important in each region. So from a global value chain research perspective, I think that's absolutely cutting edge work. I think more and more of the theoretical work on global value chains is saying that regional value chains are becoming much more important in the context of things, but we don't have good data to talk about those regional value chains. So for me, that's one of the biggest opportunities for a group like this, is to perhaps prioritize some of the statistical efforts around strengthening the regional databases that policymakers would be able to draw upon.
Thank you, Gary.
No, thanks. I guess to start with, there were probably from the beginning 2, if you want, underlying themes that drove this conference, and indeed a lot of the work around the conference. And the first theme, I guess, would be this notion of international accounts, and the international accounts, for example, that are characterized by things like TIVA, which provide a truly global view of what's going on in terms of globalization and indeed global value chains. And the second theme was really this notion of integrated national accounts for globalization. Of course, they're related, and the latter is an important part of being an input into the former. But I think that certainly the discussions that we've had over the last 2.5 days have been fundamentally all around the notion of improving the national accounts that we have. And when I refer to national accounts, I don't mean national accounts in the SNA context. I mean national accounts in terms of the official statistics produced by NSOs. And there I think that the key message that's come across throughout the discussions is the importance to look towards integration of data sources. And these themes that we had about microdata and microdata linking, I think were crucial to all the discussions that we had. It's clear from a number of the presentations that we've seen, and indeed the work that's been unfolding over the last few years, that there are potential synergies that can and are being exploited by going down this integrated microdata route. And it's important that we do this not just because it provides us with synergies that means that there are potential resource burden savings at the national level and indeed resource burden savings at the business level, but it's also important because we observe that within these disintegrated or disconnected data sources that exist today, we end up with different messages. And it's absolutely essential that at the national level, countries have a better understanding of where they are and where they sit within global value chains. They're able to better provide data in terms of their integration into global value chains. And we've had a long discussion about some of the approaches that may create these new boxes, as Frederick referred to in his presentation. Now, the good news is that a lot of work is being done, and many countries have embarked on this journey and producing some very good stuff. And France, Italy, indeed Zambia, as I found out today, have all adopted or started to adopt this microdata linking route. And I think that's where the focus needs to be. The focus needs to be really on making sure that more is done in terms of microdata linking to exploit these synergies. And indeed, more is done to make sure that we remove any asymmetries within national data and indeed in terms of bilateral data. And we've seen some very good examples from Canada and the US in terms of how we can go about doing that. Now, there are mechanisms as well that exist today to make sure that those things take place. We've described a few of them within the OECD. Our Working Party in Trade and Goods and Services will act as a mechanism to ensure that we have discussions about removing these asymmetries. And of course, we will make sure that other mechanisms or other bodies within the OECD accelerate some of these discussions around other statistical areas, for example, like FDI statistics, where we also observe these asymmetries and indeed in FATS data. The crucial point, of course, and this is perhaps going back to Gary's future, is that the future really should be about having a consistent set of data that's all been exploitable in a similar way, built on a common business register at the national level that can be linked to the trade data. I mean, the fundamental issue is how can we better reflect globalization in our national statistics? And that's really the challenge that's been thrown down. And the good news, of course, is, as I've said, is that much work is being done. And I think that one of the refreshing things that came through, and certainly this conference has helped to illustrate that, is that there's a great deal of coordination and awareness about what's going on already today. One of the concerns that I've always had is the potential for duplication, and certainly discussions that we've had, I've seen none, which is a great sign. We all appear to be pushing on the same door and pushing in the same direction, and I think that the future bodes well.
Good. Well, maybe we should end there. Ivo?
Indeed, all well spoken. So basically, for us, at least at UNSD, the reason why we're working in this area is basically we got a mandate from the Commission that said, look, we have to look at this. There's a need, as it indicated, given the new policy demands that are out there around globalization, to look at, two aspects. One was a conceptual framework, and within that conceptual framework, there was a lot of work going on, and we had to see how we can better coordinate all these sort of efforts in a better way than we do today. As we have looked at the various sort of aspects, if you look at that conceptual framework, there's still very much at the heart of it, there's the system of national accounts. We have to improve that, and we will do that. But at the same time, I think in our considerations also, we said there is probably also a need to develop an extended international account or that is really taking on other aspects. And basically, for me, in a simplified way, although I work very hard on the 2008 and they get the good for processing in there, is that we saw it very much in terms of a real sector issue in which you have a trade that was not across the border, was well said by Michael, but it extended beyond that. It was in the global value chain, although we didn't mention the global value chain if you look at these reports. That was something that was very mystifying to us, so as statisticians we didn't go in using that language. If you go back in that discussion in 2005, 2006, when we really were discussing these issues, we didn't link now it to foreign direct investment. And what you now see, in my opinion, we have that independent sort of relationship now in goods, in services, and then we have it in foreign direct investment. But now we're saying, look, we have to close the loop. And Pat said it this morning over breakfast. I don't want to make sure that I mentioned the one that I learned that from this morning. But he said, in my opinion, we have to close the loop. And in able to close that loop, we have to have that extension to allow us to make that link between trade and its related flows and the related flow within in the financial account, particularly on the financial on the direct investment side. And then if you look at that, then you see ongoing track of work that we can build on. A global register, I think we have to extend. The Euro register is there, we have to start to extend it. It's excellent work. There's work on classifications, on firm heterogeneity. if you talk about firm heterogeneity, we have to rethink about the units that we really want to measure. Do we want collections of the trade by enterprise characteristics and services in trade by enterprise statistics separately, as in the SNA format, or really do we want to do that from that new unit and you collect them at the same time? So these are all sort of aspects that we have to look at these aspects of that new classification, which I think has to be related to an extension of the ISIC, using, in my opinion, as being well formulated by Gary and put down on paper by Stacy in their work, Pasek Frederick from the Duke University, looking at these business functions aspect in terms of the value chain. We should extend on the work on harmonization, as I would call, between business statistics and international accounts. And if I look at business statistics, they come in the way of that, that information that we collect through the structural business statistics, but they also come to us in an administrative way, like customs data. For me, these are business statistics. We can call them simply business statistics and then link them to, the accounts. That's where we have to start working in developing these links and understanding them into the accounts. At the heart of this is an increasing understanding that we have to improve that. These national accounts, supply and use tables, we're working on that, on these handbooks also at the UN level within in a group of excellent experts that some of the names have been mentioned in the area of input-output association, as well as the extension to the compliance supply and use table at the global level. And I think that is definitely a work that on the horizon would be ultimately providing the national sort of statistics into a multi-regional input-output tables where you can do that analysis, what Jerry was explaining. But at the same time, we also want to extend that to the global level, and then you have a global program like the ICP program, where you basically get these new numbers that has to be generated for the overall understanding of the development in our economies. Now, that's the part that I think, as Steve has set out very nicely in his paper, might absolutely need a new sort of extension, a new satellite to the system of national accounts that we want to set out. And I think if we look at that satellite, I think we should not forget that we not only trade in value added and income and in jobs, we also trade in natural resources. And I think that extension in the global value chain, right? If you look at textile apparel, not only look at the economic aspect, including the jobs, but also at the environmental impacts, because that's very much at the heart of these negotiations that are going on. And as Arnold had indicated, we need a level of disaggregation to make that actually happen. Now, that's one part. The other part is how do we bring that all together? And we have to give a response to the Commission in organizing, in my opinion, that in a way that we bring all this excellent work together in multiple tracks under a program that we can then see how we better sort of, prioritize and set the timelines necessary to bring that new sort of statistics forward. And I think there has been proposals made around the committee. The committee would not only look at the conceptual framework. A committee would look also very much at issues like communication and outreach. It would very much link also into the development of databases that was mentioned by Isabel in terms of the roles of Eurostat versus OECD versus UN. It would also look at issues as capacity building, which has been mentioned by Ronald, because this is not an issue for the emerging markets and the advanced economies. This is very much at the heart of a universal agenda where we want to bring everybody along. And the reference was made to East Africa in terms of regional development, but you have them in West Africa. You have them in other regions of the world, and I think we have to bring them all in the same fold and make this really a universal agenda in our programs. And I think if it can be done at the Statistical Commission, we have a great chance that we get that collaboration that is needed at the global level.
Okay. Before we go to Canada, Gerardo, you may be interested that someone's reviewing their email up here on the screen, and you're often mentioned in it. Fortunately, I can't read Spanish, so. I don't know what they're saying, but. Jim, are you going to speak, or Patrick? I was going to Canada.
Well, thank you. That was a very comprehensive overview of a number of the issues. I'm not too sure what I can really add to that, but I'll make a small try to contribution. I'd like to frame my comments to some extent around the paper we discussed in the first day, Steve Landfeld's paper, which talked a little bit about the extension to the international accounts, which I basically agree with everything in that paper. I think I prefer the title to maybe a new system of global accounts to kind of distinguish it from the national accounts. And I think what we need is something that sort of helps us integrate and organize a framework for these extensions that deals with the conceptual issues, some of the measurement issues, and most certainly the uses of that. And we talked a lot about that today. One of the concerns I have, being a national accountant for a number of years, is, clearly the SNA, and when I say SNA, I mean it generically, including the BPM and all the other supporting manuals associated with that and harmonized with that, does a really good job. It basically designed to produce national statistics for policy uses, and it remains as relevant today as it was before. But it doesn't answer all of the new questions. And I think we have an SNA core, but I think there's a risk that all of these extensions, some of them we start changing the SNA and doing things that the SNA were not designed for. So for example, maybe we end up rethinking our definition of income. And I think there's a lot of national accounts that go, well, we're not really too sure what we know about the production, we know about final demand. Income is a little iffier. And then some of the things we discussed in the task force in global production was the classification, industrial classification. So when you find a factorless goods producer, should we be classifying him to an industry according to the globally consolidated parent, which may well be a manufacturer, or the activity of the unit in the domestic economy, which has been our practice in the past. Now, if choosing one over the other will certainly affect very important measures such as productivity. And I think we've got to be careful when we're thinking about what it is we want to add or how we want to add it, or if we want to change the SNA or simply add something new that's closely associated with the SNA and would supplement that. And so what I think of it, I always think of a new framework in terms of what do NSOs do and what's beyond the scope of NSOs. And clearly the NSOs manage the basic system of accounts, and we're also going to be responsible for a lot of these extensions we've talked about, particularly drilling down into the microdata and supporting some of these analytical uses and the TIVA-based analysis. And of course, I do believe that's the future of statistics. But on the other hand, there are things that go beyond that. Think of that's drilling down vertically, think of that. But thinking about drilling or going across horizontally, you start very quickly to get beyond the scope of what national accountants normally do. One good example that a lot of us do now, but really is beyond the scope of cross-border statistics, is foreign affiliate statistics. And you can take that farther and start aggregating some of our national data, and you build the global supply use tables, and you build the TIVA estimates, and you build things like the CDIS and the CPIS. Those structures are already there. So we're already, in a sense, in a global environment, but we don't have a good organizing or integrating structure around that. And then, even going beyond the international agencies, of course, there's the stuff that the academics do, the research that the academics do, which is micro-based global value change, which is, again, well beyond the scope of an NSO. So one of the things that would be very useful is to define a new global set of accounts. What are the parameters? How do they relate to the national accounts? Some of those things are obvious to us. Deal with the conceptual issues. Are there differences that we want to articulate? Are there measurement issues and challenges that we want to articulate? And I would argue that when we start drilling into these new data sets, going down micro or adding the FATS data and adding the trade by enterprise characteristics, you know what? That's a new line of business for national accountants. And it's fair to say that there are resource implications associated with that work. I think we all want to do it. And so a document like that outlined not only just the conceptual framework and the measurement issue, but the policy analytic uses as a way of aligning that with domestic policies. And they don't align perfectly in different countries at any point in time, but there is some degree of convergence, would go a long way, I think, in terms of sort of selling these types of global accounts into the domestic national accounts, which is where we've got to start building them. So that's basically what I wanted to cover today. I think, Jim, did you want to add a?
Sure. Maybe I'll just very quickly add a couple of things. and these are, your question was, what are the big takeaways? And I'm sort of going to give you my lessons learned. As sort of someone who came to this conference coming out of a historical revision or a comprehensive revision of the Canadian accounts, very proud of the very shiny set of accounts that we have out there for our users. And when I saw the first presentation saying new system of international accounts, I thought, man, we just finished. What are we talking about here? But I very quickly learned what we're really talking about is, not that what we have isn't good, but that we need a new perspective. We need a global perspective. We need a global set of accounts. And I think that's really how we need to communicate that. And that global perspective looks not just at the what, but it looks at the how it's being done. And it looks at a lot at who it's being done with. There's a lot of inter-party data that needs to be done in there. And that global set of accounts is based upon a different idea of an institutional unit, a global institutional unit, different sets of classifications, sometimes different concepts, and sort of a different register. And I think that's an important thing. And that we don't try and sort of force that global accounts back onto our national accounts. And I think that's what we need to get away. And that's what I would be fearful as a statistical agency, to say we're going to set up this global accounts and then force you to do something to your national accounts. I think we need to really say this is a different perspective. It's a different way of looking at Canada's role within the global economy, but the national accounts are still very relevant for what they do. So that was kind of the one takeaway that I had coming from that. And the second thing, which I thought was very good, again, is that, as a national agency, I come here and I say, well, that's a lot more data that we're going to have to generate. Sort of the how it's being done, who's being done with, and I was very happy to see a lot of the micro linkage, and I think that's a lot of the solution, as Nadim was alluding to. A lot of the solution to deal with the increased response burden is really looking at how we can link the existing databases that we have together to get at some of this new information that we're going to have to need to feed into these global perspective accounts. So I think that's another point. I think the other point is we're going to have to realize as we go forward, these accounts, I don't know if we can expect the same quality rigor that we have with our national accounts, and I think we're going to have to be accepting of a little less of a quality standard. Not saying that they're not useful, and they'll definitely articulate the main relationships and the main trends and be very useful, but I don't think we need to hold ourselves to the same quality rigor that maybe we do in the sense of the national accounts, and I think that's just a mindset that we need to carry forward. And the last point I think has been brought up, which I would say is very good, is communication is going to be key in all of this. Just in how we talk about these things is going to be key, but then moving forward with our users to say, there's these new data sources, this is how they work, and this is how they relate to maybe some of the stuff you're used to seeing. This is the different perspective that it provides. So anyway, I was very encouraged by the entire, very good ideas. I'm bringing a lot back to Canada. As I always do, coming back from these conferences, I bring back way too many ideas and, too much work and not enough resources. But anyway, it's very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go to the floor. We're going to be constrained on time because we have to leave time for the wrap up here. So if you could make your intervention short, hit your main point, and we'll get your ideas in here. Starting out in the back, WTO.
Thank you. Well, I'll try to make it as short as possible, but, well, first, I agree with everybody. This is an important conference. It's a milestone. It's really amazing the way we have been able to do since the original conference less than 4 years ago. And now we need to look at the way to go. And I may differ with Ivo on that. I think that referring to the Alice in the Wonderland, when Alice asks, and now where should I go? And the cat answers, well, it depends a lot on where you want to go. And I'm not sure we all agree on where we want to go. National accountants want trade statistics, the world, to conform to their vision of the world. We trade statisticians, we know that reality is messy and don't always conform to the model. But if I recall Arnold, I guess, where you said at the beginning, we should look forward. But if we look forward, I realize that trade analysts are no more interested in our discussion today. Trade analysts are interested in firm data. Somebody like Gary is interested in governance. It doesn't care anymore about the resident, non-resident issue. So, I mean, I'm really not sure that we have an agreement of where we want to go. Being practical from a trade and development perspective, I would like to call for pragmatism and humility. It's better to be roughly right than precisely wrong. And I've seen many risks of being precisely wrong in the discussion. From a trade and development perspective, I would like to have a wish, is to include as many developing countries as possible. And in order to do that, I would like to suggest that we have already a tool which is available, is trade in intermediate goods. From an analytical perspective, it's the best tool we have today to map and understand global value chains. And we have to work in two directions, trade in services, and here there are a lot of things that are going on. There is a manual, a compiler manual, which is supposed to be published soon, and Ronald. And already we have a lot of initiative to disseminate that. On trade in goods, I really appreciated the work on revising the BEC in order to adapt it to the new reality, especially what Ronald was saying between generic intermediate goods and specific ones. And if there is a cheap way of improving, is working on classification. And here I really agree with Ivo on this point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Here, France. Front.
Thank you. Yes, it was a very stimulating meeting and a little bit puzzling at the end. And when we come back, and when the colleague will say, so, what? What to do? What did you discuss? So, I have several points without a Cartesian coherence. I don't have. First, I would insist on the fact that from my vision, national accounts are not only disturbed by the fact that there is globalization, but also by the fact that this is rising a dimension which not sufficiently exists before in national accounts, which is the enterprise dimension. Before, there was two main dimensions, products and national aggregates. And yes, you can decline it by each institutional sector. But now, there is something which is crossing all those dimensions, which is a third dimension, the enterprise dimension. And that is the difficulty, because those enterprises don't care national aggregate. It's not a question of selfishness, but they don't care. But we care. And so it's very stimulating, the words used, the word was used before, international system of accounts or global accounts. It's not the same thing. International give information for each nation, if we can define it. So, okay, puzzling. Second point, I think that we have to give simple information from existing statistics. We can, yes, and we have to do that. I remember some 15 years or 12 years before at OECD in the globalization group, which Thomas at Chronoglu, and there were a first edition of the book, and the name was only Foreign Affiliates. And people don't look at that. And we decided one day to name the next edition Multinational Enterprises. And we discussed, we say, yes, we know, it does not describe multinational enterprises because there is a lot of things missing, etc. But we have to create the box, create the demand, and look some simple figure that we have and that can be useful and enlightening for people. And I think that is one of the main challenge for us. Third, there is a difficulty, and we need a pedagogy, because there is a status mixed status of study and statistics in what is done, and it makes also problem with our colleagues. I mean, and also with the users, because colleagues said, yes, if you do something with our input-output table or use table, etc. No, I will not. It's not on my head. I don't want. So it's difficult, but we have to make pedagogy with existing statistics, and also with people. Second kind of pedagogy with people who see separate domain. There are people who looks and they are used to looks on FDI statistics. There are people who looks every time on trade statistics. There are people who very well know balance of payment statistics, etc., etc. And there is we have to show how they are related. And maybe it would necessitate some more information, but not too more, I think. But the aim of helping people to understand the links, the differences between those statistics. Because if not, there will be the problem with policymakers. They will say, okay, but there is another person who say that, and they use also official statistics, and that also official statistics. And where is the truth? Okay, the truth does not exist, but approximately we can be not too wrong. Fourth point, I think that again, business statistics are rising in importance, and specifically the question of registers, of linking registers, and of enterprise group links. If I see the French example, I see that, and maybe it is the same for other countries, but I speak about the country I know. From the base of having done enterprise group statistics, then we can build the other things. So it is a very important framework, statistical framework, and also boxes to understand and to present the things. And my last point is back to one consideration. The first day, I think, was Big Bang or not? Big Bang or not? Or revolution or reformism, if you want. But yes, and there is also creative evolution, is Jaurès, French politician. But that is an important question, because we try to go step by step and to say, no, it's only evolutions. But we know that there are very hard questions. And how to prepare those hard questions. I list only two of those questions. The question of intangible. If intangible is global, we have no means to attribute them without convention to one country and not to another country. It comes back to global account. And also there is, and you speak about that, the question of income definition and the blurring frontier between income and services. So, and I think that is very important. But, you know, if I think in the 1930s, there were a lot of debates on GDP. People said it is not possible to calculate it's not possible to calculate GDP. It has no sense. And now it has too much sense. So we can look forward with little optimism.
Thank you very much. Yes, you in? I mean, IMF.
Yeah,
I know we are running out of time, so I will be very, very brief. First of all, I want to thank for the organizers, and also we want to congratulate all the speakers for their wonderful presentations. On takeaways, we have the impression that this is such a huge task going forward. So we want to focus on what is really the key issues. So one thing I observe is the rightly focus of this conference is the trade globalization. So all the issues are rightly related to the trade issues, not on the financial cross-border accounts. So one proposal we have going forward is to keep the focus on this project, on the international trade and globalization, and analyzes the link between the discount, trade account, and with the financial account, as mentioned by a few speakers, but keep the focus on this trade account. So that is one takeaway we have, and we look forward to continuing working with all of you. Thank you.
Just one point. So I follow the Canadians' view. For the international account, we have to little lower the standards. Cannot be for international level, especially for the developed countries standard. Because the global, we have to include many developing countries. So the standard can be lower. But one thing I think we have to stick on, transparency. I'm a true follower of Professor Derek Jorgensen. Everything we do, we have to be very transparent. What do you do? So that in that aspect, I very prefer the WIAD, because WIAD put everything on the net. So they give the user know what is the weakness, what is the strength of the sets of data. In Professor Jorgensen's view, is no transparency. The work is no value. Maybe too extreme, but transparency is especially important.
Okay. Yes, certainly. Transparency and best practices will be important in explaining when we're using the indirect methods, where the weaknesses are in the direct survey responses. So, yes, absolutely. Okay, I'm afraid we are out of time. I know that Inegi and the UN need to do a wrap up here. I don't think we probably need Ivo, do we? Do you want to make a statement beyond what you're going to say next in your wrap up?
It's your prerogative now.
Okay.
To, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe a 1 minute statement.
Okay, a 1 minute statement.
And you can cut me off as stringent. Now, I think you hear a lot of good ideas here, and you see the problematic is very difficult. What helped me sometimes in my projects is to look like, okay, what is the ideal thing that you want to achieve in 10 years from now or 20 years from now? That could be something like the ideal global supply and use table with all the kind of things that you heard today. We know that is a revolution. That is not going to happen now. We know that is at odds with what the Canadians say, you know, this is what we do today, and, you know, we cannot change it overnight, and it takes too much time and whatever. But at least, if you have that perspective in mind, you probably can develop a kind of a roadmap, like, okay, what can you do on short term that is not violating the possibility to realize this long-term ideal goal. So the only thing I would like to say is that the people in the OECD working group this afternoon and tomorrow during the Friends of the Chair meeting, let's try to think about this roadmap. What are the key elements that you really would like to achieve in 20 years, the ideal world, and then see where can we start now and which organization is best placed to take the lead there. That's just very simple what I would like to add.
That's a good last intervention.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I found this session and the sessions I chaired, and all of them extraordinarily interesting. I thought these were very helpful in terms of sorting out where people's priorities are and thinking about it. Having thought about it through my discussion paper, this is very helpful. And I'm sure the UN, all participants will take this into account in the following sessions you're going to be having, correct, Eva? Okay, well, Eva, let me turn it over to you, or who, or Inegi?
Yeah, we have to basically...
Gerardo, are you?
Yeah, Gerardo. Yes, congratulations.
Yes, thank you to all.
Yeah, let me start by thanking everyone in contributing to this conference, especially, of course, our host. I think the whole organization was superb. The surroundings, the setting, and the service which was provided was excellent, and I really would like to applaud them in the work they've done. So thank you. If you now on the contents sense, it's for me it has lived up to the expectation. Hubert alluded to the fact that we started a little bit in this direction about 3 years ago to get international trade more into this global value perspective, and whereas Hubert is very afraid that we're getting taken over by national accountants now, for me I think it only enriches trade statistics. I think the fact that trade statistics is combined with business statistics, is combined with FDI and other statistics, only makes it richer, and I would like to see that we can keep that perspective in an integrated way. I don't see this as competition in fields. I see this as collaboration in fields. I would like to see also that we get that vision through. There is, as also might be taken away from this conference, there is enough work to do, and I think it's just a matter of that we are divided among the various groups who are already working in these areas. And one thing I would like to add to that is that this conference and also the meeting tomorrow could bring this under a global perspective. I mean, it is typically a global issue. With what the OECD working group is doing can be seen within the global perspective, and they can take that work forward. Other groups are doing this, but I would like to see that we keep that global perspective so that all countries, it's not just the developed countries' issues, it is certainly an emerging countries' issues, and it's certainly also a developing and regional issue. So I hope that that is also taken away from this conference, that we have to cooperate in taking all of these issues forward. With that, I'll thank again everybody for this contribution. So, oh yeah, one thing I forgot. Somebody asked me about a participants list. It's on the web, I was told. So you can see that on the web. We will also put all the presentations there and papers. And I hope that we'll work on this together. We will have, I have actually an agenda and an outline for the work on Thursday. I will make it available here, otherwise we'll have it also on Thursday morning. And of course this afternoon we'll have the OECD expert group continuing on its work. Thank you.
The risk that I run is now that I would say the same thing as Ronald with regard to thinking INEGI, but I will still do it. You know, it cannot be emphasized sufficiently, I think, in terms of, you know, the services, you know, the hospitality, the friendship that we have received in organizing this conference. It has been a process, you know, prior to we came here, and I've seen the amount of efforts that has gone into it from this organization is tremendous. We have made some further friends, Arturo, among you, with Gerardo and Frederic and so on, so that we really are able now to, you know, be you know, well grounded here in INEGI. And it is I think important to say that when you establish that conference, that you also are developing a network of new contacts and colleagues. And I think you know, referring to what Hubert is saying, for myself, I think this is a major milestone. Again, back to Hubert, what he says, we have a new perspective, and that's the firm perspective. And I think that's basically where we now bring that into the accounting world, to basically bring these elements together. So I think we're doing this to improve the trade negotiations, but also understanding the investment negotiations that go along with trade. And I think in tying that together in a new sort of framework with new demands that we have, it will be another way of how we look, for instance, at productivity and how price development is going to take place. These new things have to be brought along. in the universal agenda, and that is also what I would like to stress. This is not an issue for the happy few. This is a universal agenda, so it fits nicely in the whole post-2015 development agenda, which is universal, not for nothing, because the world has been tied together and we have to give that response. We can communicate more clearly about that, and it will only feel more warmer when we meet each other, that we really depend on each other. I would like to say in closing, yes, we have to now, put up the priorities, put up the organizations that will develop that, and I think that is something that we will start discussing in the afternoon. At closing, again, I just want to have another round of applause for the hard work that INEGI has been done, and thank you wholeheartedly on this one.
Voy a hablar en español, si los que quieran.
I will now switch to Spanish for those of you who might require your translation devices.
Bien, pues muy buenas tardes a
So,
todos.
good afternoon, everyone.
En nombre del Dr.
On
Sojo,
behalf of
los
Dr.
saludo muy
Sojo, I
cordialmente.
greet
Le hubiera
you
gustado estar
cordially.
aquí,
I know
pero su agenda
Dr. Sojo would have
lo
liked to be
permitió.
here, but unfortunately
Quisiera
his
aprovechar la
agenda
oportunidad para
prevented him
algunos
from doing
comentarios muy
this.
breves
I would
y
like to take this
finales,
opportunity
comentarios
for
generales.
some very
Pensamos
brief
que en
and
esta
overall comments.
conferencia internacional
For
hay,
us,
pues,
this
muchas cosas muy
international
interesantes
conference
para las
was an
oficinas de
opportunity
estadística
to
en
discuss
México,
very
en América
interesting
Latina y en
topics
el mundo.
for statistics
Primero,
bureaus in Mexico,
que nada se
Latin America, and the
ratifica
world.
que
First,
requerimos más
I
información,
reiterate the fact that
que
we
requerimos
require
mayor
additional
desglose de la
information, a
información
further breakdown
para
of
describir y
information in
cuantificar las
order to
nuevas formas de
describe and
organización
quantify
económica
the new
que
forms
plantea
of
la
economic
globalización.
organization
Los
presented
fenómenos
by
globales nos
the
exigen generar
issue
datos
of
claros,
globalization. We
consistentes y
need to
oportunos
generate
para
clear,
ponerlos a
concise,
disposición de
and
los
timely
tomadores de
data
decisiones de
and make
todos
them
los
available
sectores
for
involucrados en la
decision
sociedad,
makers in
el
all of
gobierno
these
y las
sectors in
empresas.
society,
Y es de gran
government,
ayuda
and
para este
businesses.
propósito conjuntar
And of course,
diferentes
to this
puntos de
end,
vista,
we need to
analizarlos
merge
desde el
different
punto de vista de
perspectives.
la
We
academia,
need to
de
take
los
into account
consultores,
the
de los
perspective of
responsables de
academia,
política
of
pública
consultants,
y
of
estadísticos
policymakers,
orientados al
and
comercio internacional de
statisticians
mercancías,
focused on
a lo
the
orientados a
international
las
trade
cuentas
of
nacionales y
merchandises,
la balanza
and of
de
course,
pagos.
national accounts
Afortunadamente,
and
desde
balance
nuestro punto
of
de vista,
payments.
todos estos
Fortunately,
puntos,
from our
se
perspective, all
tuvieron
of these
aquí en la
points
conferencia
were
que
discussed
hoy termina.
throughout the conference
Y
that
pensamos
we
que
are
ahora el
closing
reto va a ser
right now.
articular
Of
este
course, the
nuevo marco
challenge
conceptual
is going to be
con la generación de información
articulating
estadística
this
y
conceptual
crear
framework
estándares para
and
producir
creating
cifras
standards
que
in order
reflejen de
to
mejor
produce
manera la
data
configuración
that may better
que hoy día
reflect
tiene
the
la
global
economía mundial.
configuration
En este
of
sentido, será de
world
gran
economy.
utilidad seguir
So we
aprovechando
will
los
need
esfuerzos
to
y
continue to
experiencias de los
use the
programas de las
experience
diversas
and expertise
instituciones que se han
acquired
reunido
in
aquí
the
en
different
Aguascalientes
institutions that
por medio
have
de
met here in
cuantificación de las
Aguascalientes.
cadenas
We
globales
need
de
to
valor,
accept
en
something that
propuestas
is
que se han hecho
fundamental
aquí
is
como
to
si se crea
think
el
in
sistema de
terms of the
cuentas
new proposals
internacionales,
such as
cómo lo
the
creamos,
global
cómo
account
cómo
system,
vamos a
how
permitir
to
incorporar
create it, how are
elementos
we going to
analíticos de la
incorporate
contabilidad
analytical
nacional a nivel de
elements
varios
that
países.
we already
En fin,
have
hay
in
mucho
our
trabajo,
national
mucha
accounts. So
discusión
there is much work to
que
do
hacer.
and much
Pero hay
discussion
preguntas tal
ahead
vez
of us.
muy
But there
importantes
are
que tenemos
key
que seguir
questions that we need
pensando en
to
ellas.
approach.
El quién comercia con quién,
Who trades with
cuándo,
whom,
y
when,
cuánto valor
and
agregado
what
se
is
incorpora,
the added
quién está
value that is
generando el
incorporated,
crecimiento y
who
cuánto
is
ingreso y
generating growth,
empleos
and
se
how
generan.
much
Creo que son
revenue and
preguntas
employment
básicas.
and
Está
is
claro que el
generated.
desafío que
So,
tenemos
of
para
course,
medir
the
los diversos
challenge
aspectos
that
que
we
conlleva
have
la
in order to measure
globalización,
the
así
different
como las
aspects that
tareas
come with
específicas para
globalization, as
consolidar
well
la
as the
infraestructura
specific tasks to
estadística básica en
consolidate the
rubros como
basic
el comercio
statistical
internacional de
information
bienes
in
y
items
servicios,
such as
las
international trades in
clasificaciones
goods and
económicas de
services,
actividades,
the
de
international
productos,
classifications
los
of
registros
activities,
estadísticos
products,
nacionales,
or
en
the
fin,
national
el
statistics
fortalecimiento del
registries,
llamado
and the
las
strengthening
estadísticas
of
económicas
the
integrales.
integrated
Quisiera
economic
agradecer
statistics.
finalmente, como
And
lo
I
hizo
would
el
like
doctor
to
Sojo al
thank, as
principio de
Dr.
la
Sojo
reunión,
pointed out at
a
the
la División de
beginning of this
Estadística de las
conference,
Naciones
I want
Unidas,
to thank the
particularmente a
UN
Ivo y a
Statistics
Ronald,
Division,
por la
particularly
confianza
Igo and
depositada para
Ronald, for
organizar
the
conjuntamente
trust
esta conferencia internacional en
for
la
the
sede del
trusting
INEGI aquí en
INEGI
esta ciudad
in
de
the
Aguascalientes.
organization of this
Pero también a la
international conference
OCDE,
here in
la Organización
Aguascalientes.
Mundial
I
del
also wish
Comercio
to
y
thank
Eurostat
the
por ser
OCDE,
copartícipes
the
en este
Eurostat
mismo
for
propósito y a
participating
todos
in
ustedes por su
this
participación
same conference, and
y valiosa
each and every one of you for your participation and
Finalmente quisiera
contribution
agradecer
to
a
this
todo el
conference.
equipo del
I also
INEGI,
wish
a mis
to thank the
compañeros que nos
entire team
ayudaron
here at
a que la
INEGI,
estancia
my colleagues
fuera
that
placentera para
contributed
todos,
to making
en
your stay
particular
a
al
pleasant
todo el
stay.
equipo de Pili
I
García, de
particularly
Berta
want to
Rivas,
thank the
de
team
José
of
Luis
Pili
Berrospe
Garcia,
y de
Berti
Víctor
Rivas,
Rodríguez.
and Victor
Les agradezco
Rodriguez. I
mucho,
thank you
de
all
veras, todo lo que
for
nos han apoyado en esta
everything that you
conferencia.
have done for the
Y
organization
también,
of this conference.
pues muchas gracias. gracias a todos.
I also
Feliz
wish to
retorno
thank you all,
a
and I
aquellos
wish
que
you a
emprenden el
safe
regreso a
return
casa.
home for
Y para los que
those of you
continúan,
who are
pues
going
nos
back
vemos
home
después de la
after this
comida
conference,
con
and
las
for those
demás
of you who
actividades.
stay
Muchas
with you, I
gracias
look
y
forward
buen
to
viaje.
seeing you after our lunch. Thank you, and have a safe return home.